Just 1 week into my marriage, I dreamed of a happy, warm life wrapped in my husband's love. But that dream was ruthlessly shattered when the man I called my father-in-law made a shocking, repulsive demand. From now on, you will take care of me in my son's place. That fateful night, my father-in-law opened my bedroom door and committed an act so shocking. It shook my entire life to its core. If you want to know the truth hidden behind this horrifying nightmare, stay tuned and listen to my story until the very end. My name is Sarah, and I am 27 years old. After a long courtship, I finally became Michael's wife. I firmly believed he was the man who would build a modest but warm and happy home with me. On our wedding day, I was so overwhelmed with emotion that I laughed and cried simultaneously while hugging my mother. I made a firm promise to myself that I would live well and never cause her to worry again. However, all of that was nothing but the naive faith of a newlywed bride. Just 1 week after moving into my in-laws' estate, I began to sense a dark shadow I had never even imagined. The beautiful 3-story colonial mansion, situated in an affluent suburb, featured a backyard filled with meticulously manicured rose bushes that my father-in-law, Richard, a wealthy and respected businessman, tended to with great care. On the outside, this house looked like the epitome of dignity, a family anyone would envy. But the longer I lived inside, the more I suffocated under its invisible rules. From my very first day, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, displayed a strict, aristocratic demeanor. She didn't yell or physically reprimand me, but her piercing gaze and commanding tone kept me constantly on edge. When I was setting the table for dinner one evening, she said, "Sarah, keep this in mind. Richard expects his dinner served exactly at 6 o'clock. You must never be late. Our family values order, and he cannot stand a disorganized house, so keep things pristine." I lowered my head and replied, "Yes, Eleanor." But a heavy sense of suffocation was already creeping into my heart. My husband, Michael, was swamped with corporate work all day and often came home late at night. He cherished me, but he seemed to lack the courage to boldly stand up to his mother on my behalf. Whenever Eleanor scolded me, he would secretly squeeze my hand behind her back, signaling me to endure it. For the sake of peace in the house, I quietly kept my mouth shut. I told myself that, as a new daughter-in-law, I needed to act wisely. But what I hadn't anticipated was my father-in-law's excessive and eventually grotesque interest in me. In his early 50s, Richard still had a solid, imposing build and a deep, authoritative voice. For the first few days, he treated me with a benevolent smile, asking trivial questions. "Is the food to your liking? Do you need anything? If you do, just tell me." I naively thought it was just ordinary familial concern. Everything changed on the third night of Michael's consecutive out-of-state business trips to Chicago. As I was getting ready for bed, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, I was startled to see my father-in-law standing there. He spoke in a low but firm voice. "Sarah, I'm feeling a bit under the weather. Could you come downstairs and make me a cup of chamomile tea?" I hesitated for a moment but nodded. When I brought the tea to the living room, Richard stared at me intently and said, half joking, half serious, "Now that you've married into this family, you're like a daughter, but also a pillar of this house. Especially when Michael isn't here, you need to pay more attention to me, the man of the house." I laughed awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. After that day, I started to notice a shift in his gaze. Whenever I was in the kitchen, he would subtly approach and strike up conversations. His eyes crawling over my body gave me goosebumps, but I didn't have any concrete justification to openly express my discomfort. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. The real incident erupted the night the whole house was dark and asleep. Just as I was drifting off, I heard footsteps stop right outside my bedroom door. At first, I thought it was Eleanor, but as a cautious knock was followed by the door slowly creeping open, my heart started to pound erratically. Under the faint light filtering in from the hallway, Richard's silhouette appeared. I froze in place, my trembling hands pulling the blanket up to my chin. He stepped into the room quietly but resolutely and uttered a sentence that made me doubt my own ears. "Sarah, starting tonight, you need to learn how to take care of me too." My entire body went rigid. I didn't know if he was serious or just testing me, but there wasn't an ounce of joking in his tone. Trembling with fear and helplessness, I barely managed to open my mouth. "Richard, what are you talking about? I am Michael's wife." How could you? Before I could even finish, he took another step forward. His eyes were flashing with possessive lust. In that moment, I felt like I was trapped behind 4 solid walls. This room, which was supposed to be my safest space, had become a prison. I wanted to scream, but my throat was blocked. Only the violent pounding of my heart echoed in my ears. That night, I barely managed to diffuse the situation out of sheer terror. I couldn't tell anyone, but I made a promise to myself. I would never let this happen again. I didn't realize then that this was merely the beginning of a horrific nightmare in this seemingly peaceful house. After that night, I stayed up with my eyes wide open. His words dug into my heart like sharp daggers. Take care of me. Those words hovered in my ears, making me tremble even as the morning sunlight seeped through the window. I huddled under the covers, trying to comfort myself by pretending it was just a bad dream. But his footsteps, his gaze, and his hushed voice were as vivid as if they had just happened. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen looking haggard. Eleanor was already making oatmeal. She glanced at me, furrowing her brow. Sarah, what is wrong with your face so early in the morning? A woman needs to maintain her appearance. If you walk around looking like a mess, people will look down on you. I bit my lip, quietly answered, Yes, ma'am, and started washing vegetables. I was terrified that if I revealed my true feelings, she would grow suspicious. But a bitter thought crossed my mind. If I told her everything, would she actually believe me? Or would she scold me for framing her husband? Just then, Richard walked into the kitchen as if nothing had happened, dressed in a crisp white dress shirt, his hair neatly combed back. He looked at me nonchalantly, but his eyes still held that terrifying, creeping intent. He asked, Did you sleep well last night? I bit my lip, too afraid to answer. Eleanor chimed in instead. Sleep well? Look at her face. She has dark circles like a raccoon. He chuckled and sat down to eat his breakfast as if it were any normal day. Seeing that, I felt a simultaneous rush of anxiety and rage. I wanted to run away from this house immediately, but I thought of my ailing mother back in our modest hometown, and her words to me on my wedding day. You have to work at it. You are the one who protects your own happiness. I couldn't return empty-handed just a week after my wedding. That afternoon, while Eleanor was out at her charity committee meeting and before Michael returned from work, Richard suddenly called me into the living room. His voice was lower and darker than before. Sarah, whenever Michael goes on a business trip from now on, you need to pay more attention to me. Don't play innocent. What I said last night was serious. With a trembling voice, I summoned all my strength and said, Richard, I am Michael's wife and a member of this family. Aside from my duties as a daughter-in-law to respect you, there is nothing else I can do. His eyes turned cold, and a sinister smile crept onto his lips. He whispered, Do you think I don't know? Michael loves you, but he's a workaholic who leaves you lonely. You're alone in this house. You need a shoulder to lean on too. Look at the bigger picture. The more you resist, the less I'll be willing to let you go. Hearing those words, I froze. My heart felt like it would explode from anger and resentment. I wanted to scream and run out the front door, but my feet felt glued to the hardwood floor. I barely managed to spit out. If you ever say something like that again, I will leave this house immediately. He glared at me, then let out a chilling laugh. I clutched my chest, trembling, and used the excuse of joining Eleanor at the upscale grocery store to escape his horrifying gaze. When Michael returned that evening, I watched him eat dinner but couldn't bring myself to say a word. I tried several times, but my lips wouldn't part. With his short-tempered personality, I knew Michael would immediately confront his father if he found out. If a conflict erupted, I was terrified I would be blamed for destroying the family. So, I chose silence. But silence meant I had to bear all the terror alone. When night fell, I locked my bedroom door tight. My husband held me in his arms and asked softly, Is something wrong lately? You look so gloomy, and you're not smiling. I almost burst into tears at the rare feeling of safety. I wanted to spill everything, but I shook my head and said, I'm just a little tired. I guess I'm still getting used to the housework. He believed me, patted my back, and told me to get some rest. But in the dark, I lay terrified, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. My fears became reality the very next day. Eleanor went to her Sunday church service, and Michael was tied up with a weekend project at his firm. I was left entirely alone in the house with my father-in-law. The massive mansion instantly turned into a steel cage. His footsteps echoing in the hallway made my heart stop every time they neared my door. Around noon, he knocked. "Sarah, I need a favor." I had no choice but to open the door. He was standing there holding a towel, claiming his back was acting up and asking me to rub some muscle ointment on it. I was startled and disgusted, but not wanting to cause a scene, I made an excuse. "I'll go get you a glass of ice water, Richard." He stared at me intently, his gaze threatening to swallow me whole. I set the glass down and hurriedly turned to leave. But just as I was about to step out of the room, he suddenly grabbed my wrist hard. His voice was rough. "How long are you going to avoid me? Didn't I tell you? Don't make me force you." Crying out of sheer humiliation, I yanked my hand away and shouted with a trembling voice, "Don't do this! If you do this one more time, I will tell Michael everything." He paused for a moment, anger flashing in his eyes, but Hez suppressed his emotions and let go of my hand. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Fine, do whatever you want, but don't regret it." I ran to my room, locked the door, slumped to the floor, and sobbed. This wasn't a hallucination or ambiguous words anymore. It was an ugly, horrifying reality pushing me into a pit of despair. I realized I couldn't endure this any longer. That night, I started writing a journal for the first time. I meticulously recorded every word and action of my father-in-law. It was to leave evidence. I believed that one day the truth would come out, and I would need proof to protect myself. Crying into my pillow in the dark, I vowed to myself, I would not just sit back and take this. If he ever opened my door again, I would find a way to turn the tables. But I had no idea that the upcoming events would push me into an even more terrifying situation. Nor did I know that my husband wouldn't be the first person to discover this secret. Writing in my tear-stained journal relieved a bit of my fear, but anxiety still floated like a shadow in every corner of the house. The sound of a knock, a passing glance from Richard, every little thing suffocated me. 2 days later, Michael left for another business trip. I made an excuse that I was going to visit my mother to avoid being alone with Richard, but Eleanor stopped me. "How long has it been since you got married? If you keep running off to your mother's, people will think there's a problem. You need to get used to this house. It'll be even harder once you have kids." I had no choice but to obey. That afternoon, while I was getting the mail, our neighbor Martha called out to me. She looked around cautiously and whispered in my ear, "Sarah, I shouldn't be saying too much, but you need to be careful. Everyone in this neighborhood knows about Richard's reputation." Do you know what I mean? I froze on the spot, dropping a stack of letters from my trembling hands. Just as I was about to ask more, Eleanor stepped out of the front door. Under her sharp glare, Martha quickly hurried away. Martha's words haunted me all evening. I wasn't the only one who noticed Richard's bizarre behavior. But why was everyone staying silent? Probably because of his polished, respected facade in the community. Who would dare step up for me? That night, I locked my door again, but my heart beat erratically. Around midnight, I heard noises in the hallway. I held my breath and pressed my ear to the door. The footsteps stopped right in front of my room. The doorknob slowly turned, but it was locked and didn't open. Heavy breathing could be heard from the other side. A long while later, the footsteps faded away. Shivering, I realized my father-in-law hadn't given up. The next morning, I called my best friend, Jessica, and poured out everything. She was silent for a while before saying, "Sarah, this is not something you can just brush off. If you stay silent, he's only going to get worse. You have to tell Michael, or at least get hard evidence." Choking back tears, I said, "What if Michael doesn't believe me? I'll lose everything." Jessica encouraged me. "You can't just be a victim forever. You have to be strong." Jessica's words left me deep in thought all day. Suddenly, I remembered the voice recording app on my smartphone. I decided to hide it under my pillow. If he came into my room again, I intended to record every word he said. The opportunity came that very night. Eleanor was at a charity gala planning meeting, and Michael hadn't returned yet. Richard knocked on my door again. I stayed quiet and didn't open it, but he spoke through the gap. "Sarah, stop fighting it. What I want is something you're going to have to accept sooner or later. Who in this house is going to believe you? Even Eleanor will think you're lying just to ruin our family. Every word he said was being captured on my small smartphone. My whole body trembled, but I saw a ray of hope. At least I had secured evidence. Now I just had to wait for the right moment. But things weren't that simple. 3 days later, I found my smartphone missing from under my pillow, later discovering it in the trash with its screen shattered to pieces. My face drained of color. It was obvious he had caught on to my suspicions and found it. Despair washed over me. Now he would be even more guarded, and I had absolutely no weapons left to protect myself. Right then, an unexpected event occurred. Deep in the night, just as I was barely falling asleep, I heard frantic knocking. Terrified, my heart raced, but then I heard a frail voice. "Sarah, please, help me." It was my sister-in-law, Emma, who had given birth barely 2 months ago. I hurried to open the door and pulled her inside. Her face was pale as a sheet, and her hands were shaking violently. "Sarah?" My dad just came into my room, and his eyes. They looked so wrong. I was so scared I ran straight to you. I froze in place, goosebumps covering my entire body. It wasn't just me. He had now started extending his vile reach toward his own biological daughter. I pulled Emma into a tight hug. My heart felt like it was tearing apart. She sobbed, "I can't tell Mom. She won't believe me. You're the only one I can lean in." I gritted my teeth as tears burst from my eyes. In that moment, I realized I could no longer stay silent. I had to protect not only myself, but Emma too. I barely managed to regain my composure and whispered, "Emma, if anything happens from now on, you come straight to me. Never be alone with him. I'll find a way to stop this. But you have to be strong too. You can't show him you're afraid." Emma nodded, holding back her tears. That night, the two of us held each other and stayed awake until dawn. I felt my chest tightening with anger, sorrow, and pity for my vulnerable sister-in-law. How could a man, who was supposed to be the father of this family, become an evil spirit instilling terror in his daughter-in-law and his own child? The next morning, Richard's eyes widened in surprise when he saw us walking out of my room together, but his expression quickly darkened. He said nothing, only offering a thin, superficial smile. That smile sent shivers down my spine. I knew then that the real war had begun. A new resolve sprouted in my heart. I was no longer the enduring daughter-in-law. I had to flip the board, expose the truth, and make sure he could no longer cast his dark shadow over this house. But I knew very well that the road ahead would be treacherous. Richard wasn't an easy man to take down. He had social status, wealth, and above all, he wore a flawless mask in front of the world. One wrong step, and Emma and I could be crushed completely. And then, like fate, an incident I completely didn't expect provided a new turning point. After the night Emma ran to me in terror, my heart sank heavily. This was no longer just my own secret fear. My father-in-law had become an object of terror for both me and his daughter. His bizarre stares, the stealthy footsteps every night, his cold sneers, all of it felt like sharp blades dangling over our heads. The next morning, Emma tried to act normal in front of Eleanor, but I saw her raise waver and her hands tremble slightly. Eleanor, oblivious, busily prepared breakfast, while Richard quietly read the Wall Street Journal, occasionally giving us an indiscernible look. I couldn't even swallow my food properly due to the anxiety. I knew I couldn't leave Emma in this silent suffering. At noon when Eleanor went out, I took Emma to a quiet room and whispered, "We have to find a way to protect ourselves. If he crosses the line, neither of us will ever be able to live with our heads held high." Emma burst into tears and grabbed my hand tightly. "I'm so scared, Sarah, but I trust you. I'll do whatever you say." Listening to her, a plan began to form in my mind. Last time, I failed because Richard found the recording app. This time, I needed to be more meticulous. I needed undeniable proof. I thought about asking Martha for help, but talking to the neighbor right now was too risky. One wrong word, and he would paint me as a wicked daughter-in-law trying to ruin the family's reputation. That afternoon, Michael called. His business trip was extended by 2 more days. Hearing that made my heart drop. With my husband away, Emma and I had to face the danger directly. I looked at Emma, and the color had drained completely from her face. As expected, the crisis came that night. Nearing midnight, the sound of knocking echoed. This time, it wasn't my room. It was Emma's. I held my breath and pressed my ear to the wall. I could clearly hear Richard's voice. "Emma, open the door. Your father needs to talk to you." I saw Emma trembling all over, tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at me. I signaled her to stay quiet, pulled out a new, cheap smartphone I had bought a few days ago and hidden deep in a drawer, and hit the record button. The knocking grew more violent, followed by an oppressive voice. "Emma, aren't you going to open it?" "I know you're awake." I gritted my teeth, my body stiff with tension. I thought it would all be over if he broke the door down. But suddenly, the knocking stopped, and a chilling silence filled the hallway. A long time later, we heard the living room door open and his footsteps retreating downstairs. Only then did I let out a sigh of relief. We had avoided the worst-case scenario. However, the smartphone had recorded his voice pounding on the door, heavily hinting at his dark intentions. It wasn't definitive proof yet, but it was a crucial clue. The next morning, I gathered the courage to call Michael and play the recording, but by a cruel twist of fate, he was in a meeting and didn't answer. I decided to wait a little longer, but Richard seemed to have caught on. During lunch, he suddenly slammed his fork down on the table and stared directly at me. His voice was cold as ice. "Sarah, lately I've noticed you and Emma whispering together, hiding things. What kind of scheme are you plotting in my house?" My heart felt like it plummeted to the floor. Eleanor looked up, puzzled. "Do you two have a secret?" I bit my lip, trying to maintain my composure, and answered, "No, Eleanor. I was just telling Emma to take good care of herself since she recently gave birth." Richard continued to glare at me with a piercing gaze that felt like it was reading my mind. After the meal, he deliberately sent Eleanor and Emma upstairs first and kept me in the living room. He stepped close and whispered in my ear, "Don't think you can fool me. If you keep doing useless things, I won't let it slide." Realizing he suspected everything, I shuddered. That afternoon, Emma secretly slipped a small note into my hand. She whispered with a trembling voice, "Sarah, I couldn't sleep a wink last night. So, just in case, I wrote everything down. If something happens to me, please keep this." I took the note, unable to hold back my tears. A young woman who had just given birth, who should be loved and cared for, was trembling in such fear that she felt the need to write what essentially looked like a will. When night fell, I couldn't close my eyes. Emma and I stayed awake in the dark, holding each other. Outside, the wind howled, and the windows rattled. Every sound felt like a sinister warning. I prayed for the sun to rise quickly, but fate seemed to test me. Around 2 a.m., my bedroom door suddenly rattled violently. It wasn't a light tap this time. It was a heavy, forceful pounding. I jumped up and pressed record on the smartphone with shaking hands. Richard's voice boomed through the door. It was rough and authoritative. "Sarah, open the door. I've been patient long enough. Just because you're the daughter-in-law, do you think you can defy me?" Emma hugged me tight, her face ghastly pale. With a trembling voice, I yelled through the door, "Richard, if you do this one more time, I'm calling the police." He went silent for a moment, then let out an eerie chuckle and muttered lowly, "Impressive. You've got guts, but remember this. If you dare do such a thing, this family will be torn to shreds, and you won't walk away unscathed either." I recorded every single word. My heart was racing wildly, but a single conviction grew in my mind. Now, the evidence was sufficient. If I made the decision, I could expose this truth to the world. The next morning, as the sun rose, I looked in the mirror and was shocked by my haggard face and dark circles, but I found a change in my eyes. It wasn't just fear anymore. There was a resolute determination. I realized that if I hesitated any longer, Emma and I would never escape. And the opportunity came faster than I thought. That afternoon, Michael called to say he was coming back a day early. Clutching the smartphone, I felt a tension and anxiety so intense my heart felt like bursting. Tonight, I had to make a decision. Would I bury this in silence, or reveal everything and face the storm? I didn't know what the outcome would be. But one thing was certain. This truth could no longer be hidden. I was ready to fight my first battle in the war zone, that was my in-laws' home. Michael returned a day earlier than planned. Seeing him walk through the door, I felt both relief and a full body tremble. Having endured the terror alone for days, I had been waiting for this exact moment. But deep down, a terrible anxiety flared up. Would my husband believe me? Would he have the courage to face the truth that the father he respected so much was actually a repulsive monster? At dinner, the whole family gathered around the large oak dining table. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary evening, but Emma and I exchanged nervous glances. Sitting at the head of the table, Richard maintained his dignified expression, but the occasional tapping of his silverware against his plate sounded like a quiet warning. I held my breath and tried to stay calm, but my palms were drenched in sweat. Michael looked back and forth between Emma and me, frowning. "What's wrong with you two? Why do you look so stiff? Are you hiding something from me?" Just as I swallowed hard and was about to speak, Richard cut in. "You wouldn't know since you travel so much, but it seems the girls have a lot to talk about lately." "It's nothing." His words were a trap. I stayed quiet, knowing a rush reaction could ruin everything. After dinner, when Michael went up to our room, I quietly grabbed his arm. My voice was shaking. "Michael, we need to talk." He sat on the edge of the bed, looking at me seriously. "Tell me, you've been really off lately. Is my mom giving you a hard time?" I bit my lip as tears burst out. "It's not your mom, it's your dad. Michael, I don't know how to say this, but while you were away, your dad—" He kept forcing himself on me. Michael froze on the spot, his eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" Choking on my sobs, I laid out everything that had happened. The late-night knocks, the ambiguous comments, the intentional attempts at physical contact, and how he even approached Emma. With trembling hands, I unlocked my phone and played the audio file. Richard's voice flowed out clearly. "Sarah, open the door. I've been patient long enough. Just because you're the daughter-in-law, do you think you can defy me?" Michael went completely pale and froze. He clutched the phone, his hands shaking violently with rage. "No way. My dad. How could my dad say these things?" Isobed. I didn't want to believe it either. But this is the reality. I endured it alone for so long. And Emma. Emma ran to my room to ask for help. Right then, Emma knocked and entered the room. Pale and frantic, she held the note she had written. She handed it to Michael with shaking hands. "Michael, I really didn't want to say anything. But it's all true. I wrote this down just in case." Emma's voice was choked, her eyes full of tears. Michael slumped down and buried his face in his hands. He looked as if his entire world had collapsed. The truth that the father he revered and followed was a vile monster trying to harm his wife and daughter lay bare before his eyes. After a long silence, Michael grabbed my hand tightly. His eyes were burning with rage. "I won't let you suffer alone anymore. But we need to stay calm. My dad is a prominent figure in this town. No one will believe just words. We need more concrete evidence." I cried and nodded. Part of me was relieved that my husband was on my side, but another part was terrified of the rocky road ahead. Richard was not someone who would let his ugly side be exposed easily. That night, the three of us put our heads together and made a plan. Mikkel decided to buy a small nanny cam to hide in my room. If Richard tried any reckless behavior again, video footage would be undeniable proof. Emma was still shaking beside us, but her eyes were resolute. "I'm with you, Sarah. We can't let him keep doing these evil things." The next day, everything seemed to return to a temporary calm. Richard acted as if nothing had happened. But that tranquility only made me more afraid. I knew it was the calm before the storm. When evening came, Michael stayed in the living room under the guise of doing paperwork, keeping a close eye on the situation. Emma and I pretended to go to bed early. The small camera was already hidden in a corner of my room. My heart raced, and my ears were entirely focused on the sounds outside. Near midnight, footsteps echoed. I tensed my body and gripped my blanket. The door rattled slightly, and Richard's whispering voice came through. "Sarah, open the door. I know you're not asleep." I held my breath and didn't answer. He pounded harder, annoyance in his voice. "Don't make this difficult. The more you resist, the less I'll give up." Right then, I heard the click of the lock. He was using a spare key. I shook with terror, but the moment the door cracked open, Michael bounded up the stairs and shouted, "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" The air froze. Richard stiffened. his face losing its color. But he quickly faked his composure. I thought I heard a noise from the room, so I just opened the door to check. Why are you yelling? Michael looked him dead in the eye and said firmly, Stop acting. I know everything. If you do this one more time, I will no longer consider you my father. Richard stayed silent for a few seconds before letting out a dry laugh. You ungrateful brat. The daughter-in-law is insolent. And now my own son. Is this whole family turning against me? My blood ran cold at his words. I realized that in this moment, the real war had begun. There was no more room for patience or fear. The truth was out, and we had to prepare for a horrific battle right inside the walls of this family home. After Michael confronted his father that night, the suffocating air in the house grew even heavier. I stayed awake, clearly hearing Michael's helpless sighs beside me. From the next room, I could occasionally hear Emma sobbing. No one spoke, but we all knew the boundary between safety and danger had collapsed. The atmosphere at breakfast the next morning was stifling. Sitting at the head of the table, Richard simply stared at his plate, but an unreadable smile hung on his lips. His silence was even more chilling than his shouting from the night before. Eleanor, still entirely oblivious, scolded Michael. Why would you yell at your father like that? It was so loud last night. You scared me. What happened? Michael glanced at Emma and me before answering bluntly. It was nothing, Mom. I was just talking too loudly. Eleanor shook her head. You've been so on edge lately. Your father is just worried about you two. Hearing that, I wanted to spill everything, but Michael's gaze stopped me. He seemed to think it wasn't the right time yet. After breakfast, Michael took Meadow our room and whispered, We have to be really careful from now on. Dad knows we have evidence. He won't back down easily. He'll probably try to ruin your reputation in front of Mom or the neighbors. I nodded. Michael was right. A cornered animal only grows fiercer. That afternoon, while I was outside watering the plants, Martha, our neighbor, approached as if she had been waiting. She leaned in close and whispered desperately, The atmosphere in your house has seemed off the past few days. Listen to me, Sarah. Never stay home alone with Richard. People in town have been gossiping for a while, but everyone's too afraid to speak up. I'm telling you this because I feel so bad for you. I choked up, tears stinging my eyes. Martha, I'm trying to find a way. But I'm terrified no one will believe me if I speak out. Martha sighed, then suddenly pressed a small box into my hand. My son bought this mini camera for his store, but take it. Hide it somewhere inconspicuous. If something happens, you need solid proof. You can't just let him get away with this. With trembling hands, I accepted it. A wave of gratitude and sorrow washed over me. Everyone kind of knew, but no one had dared to step forward. That night, after the house went to sleep, Michael and I secretly installed the new camera. Emma, with a tense face, helped us. We hoped to capture the truth on video, but the peace didn't last long. Around midnight, just as I was falling asleep, a sharp scream rang out from Emma's room. Michael and I jumped out of bed and ran over. The door was wide open, and Emma was slumped on the floor, clutching her chest and gasping for air. In front of her stood Richard, his eyes bloodshot. In his hand was a ring of keys. Michael yelled, Dad, what the hell were you trying to do to my sister? Richard calmly replied, as if nothing had happened. I heard the baby crying, so I came to see if Emma needed help, and she just started screaming. Is this a world where a daughter suspects her own father? Emma, her voice shaking, said, No, Michael. He looked at me with those weird eyes and locked the door. I was so scared. Michael rushed in and pulled his sister out of the room. His eyes blazed with fury directed at his father. I helped Emma up, my heart breaking at the sight of her drenched in sweat. In that moment, the facade of the family completely shattered. The commotion woke Eleanor, who came running and gasped in horror at the scene. My God, what is all this noise in the middle of the night? Richard quickly intercepted. Look at this. I came to check on my daughter, and they treat me like a criminal. This house is going to hell. Eleanor looked at Michael and me with suspicious eyes. He was turning us into shameless children. After everyone dispersed, Michael quietly said to me, I saw it with my own eyes now. He's not even hiding it anymore. Tomorrow, I'm taking all the evidence. Even if we get criticized, I can't let him live like this. I looked at Michael and cried. I was proud of him, but deep down an ominous feeling settled in. This fight wouldn't be easy, and Richard wasn't the type to just sit and take a beating. As expected, the next morning, as Michael was getting ready for work, Richard stopped him. Michael, you listen to your wife too much lately. Have you forgotten who raised you? Are you really going to turn your back on your father over some girl? Michael replied with a voice full of rage. I respected you, but what you did to my wife and sister is unforgivable. I'm exposing everything. A thin smile appeared on Richard's face. Let's see you try. If you dare do something like that, you'll see this family destroyed. Your mother will collapse. And do you really think your wife can handle the fallout? The threat sent shivers down my spine. It was no longer a silent intimidation. It was a public declaration of war. I realized he was fully prepared to trample even his own family to cover up his sins. That evening, I held Michael tight in our room and cried, Honey, we really need to think this through carefully. He won't just sit still. But if we hesitate, Emma and I won't have the strength to hold on. Michael stroked my hair and said firmly, I know. No matter what happens, we have to protect each other. We can't let him commit any more evil. Under the dim lamp, I saw the resolute determination in Michael's eyes. It was the look of a man choosing to face the truth, knowing he was walking into a thorny path. But I sensed that this fight would go beyond a simple family issue. It would be a life-or-death battle between truth and lies, light and dark. And I, the newlywed, had to stand at the center of the storm. After that morning of threats, the already tense house plunged into a suffocating silence. Even just pacing the backyard made my heart beat anxiously. It felt like all eyes were on me. In front of the neighbors, Richard still played the part of the refined model patriarch. But Michael, Emma, and I knew the sheer brutality he was ready to unleash, to crush us and maintain his mask. During lunch, Eleanor made a casserole, muttering to herself as if thinking aloud. Why does this house feel like walking on eggshells lately? My husband is scowling. My son is acting blunt. My daughter-in-law's face is full of shadows. Are you all trying to drive me crazy? I kept my head down, unable to speak. The veins popped on Michael's hands as he gripped his fork, but he took a deep breath and managed to stay calm. Sitting across from us, Richard smirked, seemingly mocking us. After the meal, Michael called Emma and me into our room and spoke quietly. I contacted a friend of mine, David, who's a lawyer. He said if we have solid proof, we can take legal action. But we have to be patient. Dad is very cunning. He can easily act innocent. Emma's voice trembled. Michael, I'm so scared. I wake up terrified every night. It always feels like he's standing right outside my door. I can't take this anymore. I hugged Emma. It broke my heart that a woman who had just given birth had to live in constant fear. I looked at Michael desperately. Honey, we can't delay this anymore. If we do, he's going to turn the situation around. He's already trying to make us look like the bad guys. Michael nodded with a stiff expression. I know. We prepped tonight. Let's move the camera Martha gave us and put another one in the living room. If Dad makes another move, he'll show his true colors for good. When evening came, the whole family gathered in the living room to watch TV. Eleanor laughed innocently at a sitcom, while Emma sat pale-faced, holding her baby. I tried to act natural beside her, but because of Michael's sharp gaze tracking Richard's every move, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Around 11 p.m., Eleanor yawned and went to bed first. I walked Emma to her room, firmly locked her door, and returned to mine. Michael sat right by the door, staring outside with burning eyes. I won't give him any chances tonight. At midnight, footsteps echoed. Michael and I held our breath. The living room door creaked slightly, and Richard's whispering voice came through. Sarah, you're such a good daughter-in-law. I'm coming in. My heart felt like it stopped, and my body shook. Instantly, Michael burst out of the room and flipped on the bright living room lights. Richard stopped dead in the middle of the hallway, his face losing color. But he still tried to act calm. I heard a noise, so I came out to check. Why are you making such a fuss? Michael pointed straight at him, growling. Stop acting. Everything is on video. I also walked out with my phone, showing the footage recorded by the camera in the room. On the screen, Richard was clearly seen sneaking the door open, looking around anxiously, and muttering my name. It was undeniable proof. Richard's face turned white before he suddenly burst into loud laughter. Impressive. You dare lay a trap for me? But do you think you can bring me down with just this? At the sound of his laughter, Emma, in the next room, broke into tears. The baby's cries pierced the night silence. Startled, Eleanor ran out, saw the chaotic scene, and gasped. My God, what is going on here? Richard quickly spoke up. Look, my son and his wife conspired to set a trap for me and secretly filmed me. Do they even respect me as the head of this family? Eleanor looked at Michael and me with a panicked face and yelled, What have you two done? Secretly filming your father choking on my tears, I said, Eleanor, I didn't want to do this either, but without proof, who would believe me? He came to my room night after night, and he even threatened Emma. Eleanor stumbled, her face turning pale. That's nonsense. He is my husband and your father. Michael grabbed his mother's shoulders and said with a choked voice, Mom, I saw it with my own 2 eyes. Please, believe us. We can't let him keep doing this. The whole house was engulfed in chaos. Richard roared, Get out! I own this house! Anyone who defies me will pay. His threat sounded like a thunderclap. I held Emma and the baby tight, crying. In that moment, I realized there was no stepping back from this fight. The evidence was secured, the truth was out. But we had also provoked the cruel ego of that man. Michael stood in front of Emma and me, shouting into the dark night with blazing eyes. I don't care if this family falls apart. But starting today, I will not let you harm my wife and sister for 1 more second. The air was heavy, and the wind howled outside the windows. I sensed that our family had just stepped into the greatest storm of our lives, and no one knew who would be left standing when it passed. After that chaotic night, the air in the house scattered like shrapnel from an exploded bomb. Everyone fell into a heavy silence. No one spoke. But that silence terrified me even more. It was like the calm surface of the water right before a hurricane. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast, Eleanor yelled from her room in a shrill voice, Richard, explain to me exactly what happened last night. Why were you lingering outside your daughter-in-law's door and getting caught on video? Richard, showing not a hint of fear, scoffed and replied, You believe them? The new daughter-in-law can't adjust to the family rules, so she cooked this up to drag me down. My son is blinded by his wife and turning his back on his father. Are you going to believe me, or those immature brats? Eleanor's voice trembled. But the video clearly showed you, Richard yelled. Videos can be easily manipulated. Do you really think I'd be stupid enough to do something like that in a house full of people? I stood outside the door, feeling my heart pound. Eleanor had trusted her husband her entire life. I knew she wouldn't accept this truth easily. Ace expected. During lunch, Eleanor looked straight at me with eyes full of suspicion and asked, Sarah, tell me the truth. Did you scheme this up on purpose? If you're trying to ruin this family over some petty conflict, I will never forgive you. Her words pierced my heart like a sharp blade. I choked up and cried. Eleanor, I never once wished for this family to break apart. But everything I told you is true. Emma suffered the same thing. If you don't believe me, ask Emma. Emma, holding her baby with pale blue lips, barely managed to say, Mom, Sarah is telling the truth. I'm so scared. I tremble so much every night I can't sleep. I never want to be alone with Dad again. Hearing that, Eleanor went into shock and dropped her fork. But Richard immediately slammed the table and shouted, Shut your mouths, you shameless brats! How dare you frame me? The whole house froze, and only the sound of the baby crying echoed loudly. I hugged Emma, while Michael, his face flushed, barely suppressed his rage. By the afternoon, the story had started to leak out of the house. Neighbors began to gossip about what had happened. I heard there's massive trouble at the Sterling estate. The son and daughter-in-law secretly filmed the father? Sounds like some complicated drama. When I went to the upscale grocery store, dozens of eyes followed me, whispering behind my back. I wanted to scream that they didn't know anything, but I bit my lip and quietly walked past. I swallowed my anger and fear. Richard was one step ahead, making us look like the bad guys. That evening, Michael called his lawyer friend, David, and explained the situation. David's low voice came through the receiver. To file a lawsuit or get police help, you need more definitive proof. A blurry nighttime video might not be enough, but if it's happened multiple times and there are witnesses, we have a case. Michael frowned, gripping the phone tightly. If we wait any longer, my wife and sister won't survive this. David sighed. I understand, but we have to approach this carefully. Confronting him head-on right now is too dangerous. I felt conflicted listening to them. Waiting longer was horrific, but acting immediately was risky. That very night, Richard launched a new attack. After dinner, he stared straight at me and spoke clearly. This house has been nothing but noisy since you arrived. Honestly, if it's so hard to live here, just leave. Don't stay here and cause trouble. I froze. Eleanor looked at me with cold eyes. Sarah, listen to Richard. They say a house is peaceful when the daughter-in-law is good, but there hasn't been a quiet day since you got here. Think carefully. I eventually burst into tears and slumped against the table. Emma hurriedly supported me, her eyes also welling with tears. Michael slammed his plate down and growled, Stop it! If anyone needs to leave this house, it's not my wife. The atmosphere was on the brink of explosion, and Richard slammed his fist on the table, yelling, You ungrateful punk! You dare defy your father over some girl? Have you forgotten who raised you? Michael looked his father dead in the eye and said firmly, I haven't forgotten. But starting today, I will not let you harm my family anymore. During the fierce argument, Eleanor slumped in her chair, trembling with a pale face. She whispered, My God, this family is really going to ruin. I ran to support her and said with a choked voice, Eleanor, please believe us. I don't want the family to break either, but if we stay silent, it will truly destroy everything. Eleanor covered her face and burst into tears. I knew she was torn between her faith in her husband and the pain of her children. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat quietly in the living room, staring at the smartphone holding the audio files and records with bloodshot eyes. I went over and sat next to him. He whispered, I've made up my mind. Tomorrow, I'm going to file a police report through David. Even if Mom's heart breaks and the neighbors point fingers, we can't let this darkness continue. I cried. I knew the road ahead would be brutal, but we had nowhere left to retreat. The sound of the night wind slipping through the window frames and the baby whimpers mixed together in the house. Everything signaled that tomorrow would be point of no return. The next morning, the house was submerged in a heavy silence. Sunlight streamed through the windows but failed to lift the dark mood. I sat at the dining table, holding my fork with a trembling hand, unable to swallow a single bite. Emma held her baby with hollow eyes, and Michael kept quiet with a look of firm resolve. Richard still sat at the head of the table, looking entirely unbothered, as if nothing had happened. Occasionally, he flashed a thin smile, scanning Emma and me, his gaze feeling like an invisible blade. Eleanor simply remained silent. After the meal, Michael stood up and said calmly, I'm going out to take care of some business. Richard frowned. What business? Michael looked him straight in the eye and answered firmly, I'm going to see a lawyer. The air froze completely. Eleanor gasped in horror, and my heart dropped. Richard slammed his coffee mug down, jumped up, and growled, Are you seriously going to rebel against me? Michael didn't back down. It's not a rebellion. You've done something unforgivable. If you don't stop yourself, we have no choice but to use the law. Richard's eyes turned bloodshot. Pointing a finger at his son, he yelled, Fine, go ahead and sue your own father, but from today on, don't call me Dad. I have no son like you. Eleanor covered her face and sobbed. My God, how did it come to this? I hugged Emma tightly and cried, but part of me felt relieved. Finally, my husband had stepped out of the darkness and confronted the truth head-on. That afternoon, Michael took Emma and me to meet David at his law firm. He listened to our entire story and carefully reviewed the videos, audio files, and the note Emma had written. He frowned and tapped his desk lightly. This is a severe matter. But to be honest, it might not be quite enough to take immediate legal action in court right this second. However, the fact that you have multiple recordings and videos will act in your favor. My advice is to install more cameras around the house, especially in the hallways and outside doors. The more data you have, the more solid the case. I asked with a trembling voice. But if we wait longer, Can we even survive? David replied in a low tone. I understand. But when fighting against someone with social standing, a single mistake is unacceptable. One small loophole could make all our efforts vanish. Michael squeezed my hand and nodded. Understood. We'll be patient. On the way home, my heart sank heavily. Richard was sitting on the sofa, watching our every move with sharp eyes. As I tried to go into my room carrying Emma's baby, he ground his teeth and said, "You better be careful. Don't think just because you met a lawyer you can escape me. I've been through it all in the business world. I won't be taken down by rookies like you." It gave me the creeps, and I quickly shut the door. That night, Michael installed 2 additional mini cameras in the hallway and on the stairs. Emma and I watched him with nervous hearts. We hoped his true colors would be revealed just one more time. And like a cruel joke of fate, Richard made his move that very night. Around 2 a.m., heavy footsteps echoed. The camera captured his figure clearly. He approached Emma's door, holding a ring of keys, and looked around. Just as he inserted a key into the lock and turned it, Emma screamed. Michael and I rushed out. Michael snatched the keys from his hand and yelled, "Dad, you're doing this again?" Richard's face turned red, and he shouted, "I was just checking if she locked the door properly. But you guys are setting me up." Michael threw the keys on the floor and yelled back, "Stop it. Everything is recorded. You can't deny it anymore." Emma was trembling while holding her baby, and I ran to support her. My heart felt like it would burst. This time, we had secured clear, undeniable evidence. The next morning, Michael packed all the videos, audio files, and documents and headed to David's office. David reviewed everything and nodded. "This is enough. I'll help you file the police report. You need to be extremely careful starting today. When he finds out, he will push back like a maniac." As David predicted, when Richard found out that evening that Michael had filed a police report, he exploded in rage. He shattered a teacup in the living room and screamed, "You traitors! How dare you sue me? Do you want me to go to jail? Fine, I'll kill you all." Eleanor slumped in her chair, crying as if she were about to faint, and I hugged Emma and the baby, trembling in tears. Michael stood in front of us and said firmly, "The more you act like this, the more you expose your own guilt. The law won't forgive you." Richard laughed maniacally, his eyes bloodshot. "Fine. I have no children like you. This family is finished today, and you brought it all on yourselves." His screaming echoed through the mansion, sounding more horrifying than the wind blowing outside. I realized that in this moment, the war had entered its most violent stage, and there was no going back. The rumor that Michael had filed a police report spread faster than expected. Within a day, the whole wealthy suburb was buzzing. Whenever I went to the local farmer's market or the grocery store, people stared at me with heavy, curious, and suspicious eyes. Some clicked their tongues in pity, while others didn't hide their doubts. Well, I don't know the truth, but a daughter-in-law suing her father-in-law? Maybe she's just a gold digger plotting to get the estate. I trembled at the whispers, a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to scream and explain, but I ultimately bit my lip and walked away. I knew that only the truth recognized by the law could save us, not words. At home, Eleanor was deteriorating rapidly. She just sat blankly, lacking the energy to even yell like before. I approached her and pleaded, "Eleanor, please believe us." "I'm not lying." She covered her face and burst into tears. "I don't know who to believe anymore. He is my husband. Living with him my whole life, I never imagined he could do such things. But when I look into your and Emma's eyes, it seems so real. My God, why is my life so cursed?" I hugged her and cried with her. "Eleanor, I just want you to stand on the side of the truth. I don't want this family to break either, but if we stay silent, we'll all be swallowed by the darkness." Meanwhile, Richard began taking action in full force. He went around the country club and the neighborhood, loudly claiming that his son and daughter-in-law had framed him. He said I was having an affair, wanted a divorce to take his money, and that Michael was being manipulated by me. Those lies spread quickly. One evening, when I stepped out briefly with Emma's baby, an unfamiliar woman walked past and said in a cold voice, "Daughters-in-law these days reporting their fathers-in-law to the police. What is the world coming to?" My heart stopped, and I almost burst into tears. But I took a deep breath and steadied myself. If I collapsed now, all our efforts would be for nothing. Fortunately, the police took clear action. They began summoning us for official statements. Michael, Emma, and I gave detailed accounts of everything with trembling hearts, from the late-night knocks to the video of him trying to open the door with the spare key. The detective in charge noted everything carefully and said, "It's a sensitive issue involving family, but the videos and audio files you submitted give us enough grounds to expand the investigation. Rest assured, the law will protect the victims." That gave me a ray of hope, but I was still terrified of how Richard would retaliate. As expected, Eleanor called us that night. Her voice was shaking. "Sarah, please. Drop the charges. My husband promised me he would never do it again. I can't bear to see my husband go to jail and my son labeled a traitor. Please, reconsider." I froze, and Michael looked shocked. "Mom, please understand us. This isn't a small issue anymore. Dad insulted my wife multiple times and threatened my sister. If we drop the charges, it's like leaving this house in darkness forever." Eleanor burst into tears and yelled, "But if this continues, the whole town will turn their backs on us. How will I ever show my face? Please, don't kill Matt Weiss." I hugged her and cried together. "Eleanor, I don't want to break your heart either. But siding with him means leaving Emma and me to live in hell. Could you bear to watch that?" She paused at my words, still wearing a look of agony. I knew she was torn between her husband, her children, the truth, and the family's reputation. Richard, meanwhile, continued to spread false rumors. He told everyone I wastering to steal the house and that I had brainwashed Emma. The lies were gaining traction. The next day, the police suddenly visited our house with a search warrant. They confiscated the cameras, the hard drives, and the ring of keys Michael had secured. Richard was furious, almost lunging at the officers, yelling, "This is all a show! They set this up to humiliate me and send me to jail, but I won't just stand by." Neighbors gathered around the estate, whispering. One older woman clicked her tongue and said, "Looks perfect on the outside, but completely rotten on the inside." Richard, enraged by the stares, yelled, "Don't believe them! I am innocent!" But I could see that many people no longer looked at him with absolute trust. His dignity was shattering into pieces. That evening, staying temporarily at Jessica's house, I sat quietly by the window. The city lights were vibrant, but a storm raged in my heart. I remembered myself on my wedding day, dreaming of a happy family as I stepped into my in-laws' home. Yet in just 1 week, I had plunged into a dark hell. Michael placed his hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Don't break down. We still have a long way to go, but we will absolutely win." I nodded, though the tears kept falling. Richard wasn't going to admit defeat easily. I realized this fight had moved beyond a family issue and had become a public war in front of the whole society. The next few days passed in extreme tension. At Jessica's house, which was our only sanctuary in the storm, I knew Richard was still active outside. He went around to relatives and neighbors, crying and claiming he was a victim betrayed by his children. One afternoon, while I was putting Emma's baby to sleep, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Richard's older brother, Uncle Thomas, and a few other relatives stood there with grim faces. Uncle Thomas stepped inside and spoke heavily. "Sarah, Michael, what you're doing is a disgrace. Bringing your father to court. If this gets out, our entire extended family will be shamed." Michael answered calmly, "Uncle Thomas, I'm sorry to hurt the family's pride. But please look at the truth. My father did unforgivable things to my wife and my sister. I couldn't stay silent." Another relative chimed in, "But is that evidence even solid? Are you doing all this over a few blurry videos? Women easily make things up, you know." Hearing that, I burst into tears and said with a choked voice, "Do you think we wanted this family to be destroyed? Who would dare report their father-in-law to the police? If there wasn't a dead end, Emma and I held it in for so long. If we had stayed quiet, our lives would be over." The air grew heavy. Uncle Thomas sighed. "I'm not saying you're completely wrong, but since the police report is filed, the bond between father and son is over. From now on, you'll be branded as the traitors of the family. Be prepared for that." Those words cut through my heart like a knife. I looked at Michael. His eyes were bloodshot, but he bowed his head firmly. "Uncle Thomas, I'm prepared. Even if I'm branded a disgrace, I will protect my wife and sister." Hearing that, their relatives shook their heads and left, leaving a cold silence behind. Emma hugged her baby and sobbed. "Sarah, will a peaceful day ever come for us?" I hugged Emma and answered with a choked voice, "It will. Trust me. We've come too far to turn back." The police investigation continued, and they called in more neighbors for statements. Martha, our neighbor, stepped up as a witness. She clearly told the detective, "I saw Richard wandering around his daughter-in-law and daughter's bedroom doors late at night several times. I was too scared to speak up before, but now I can testify for sure." A few other neighbors also admitted to hearing strange noises at night. These testimonies drove Richard even crazier. He called all his relatives to the estate and yelled in the front yard, "Listen clearly. My son is ungrateful. My daughter-in-law framed me, and my daughter is a coward. Will you believe them or me?" Many relatives stayed silent, and some just shook their heads and sighed. I felt the truth growing heavier than the lies. That evening, Eleanor visited us again. She sat in a chair and said with a choked voice, "Kids, maybe I was wrong. I just kept trying to believe him. I didn't know what to say when the police asked me questions. It breaks my heart. But I think I have to stand on the side of the truth now." The moment I heard those words, tears poured from my eyes like rain. I hugged her and felt her shoulders shaking. Michael also lowered his head and said, "Mom, if you just believe us, we can be 10 times stronger." That night, for the first time in months, I saw real hope. But I also knew that as the truth came to light, Richard's final desperate struggle would be even more violent, potentially pushing our family to a life-or-death crossroads. Finally, the fateful day arrived. After months of investigation, the authorities announced their official findings. The whole family, relatives, and many neighbors gathered at the local courthouse to hear the results. The sky that day hung heavy, much like our hearts. Richard sat on one side of the large room. He looked haggard, but his eyes were still defiant. On the opposite side, Michael, Emma, and I sat leaning on each other. Our hands were shaking, but our eyes were firm. Eleanor sat behind us, quietly clutching her cross necklace, continuous praying. The lead prosecutor loudly read out the evidence one by one. The video of Richard holding the keys in front of the door, the audio files containing his threatening voice, and the testimonies of neighbors like Martha, everything was laid out clearly. Richard yelled, "It's all a misunderstanding. They framed me." But his voice lost all its power in the face of the undeniable evidence. The prosecutor spoke calmly. "Richard Sterling, your claims directly contradict the collected evidence. Based on the law, we have concluded that you inflicted harassment, intimidation, and emotional abuse on your daughter-in-law and daughter. This case will be processed according to the full extent of the law, and a strict restraining order is in effect." The room plunged into silence. Emma hugged her baby and burst into tears. I held her hand and cried. But strangely, deep inside, I felt a sense of peace. Michael sat up straight, tearing up, yet wearing an expression of ultimate resolve. Richard's face flushed red as he screamed, "You traitors! This whole family is full of traitors!" At that moment, Eleanor stood up from her seat. Her voice trembled, but she was resolute. "Richard, you are the traitor. You betrayed your wife's trust, your children's respect, and your basic human decency. I trusted you once, and foolishly protected you. But I can no longer close my eyes to the truth today." Richard froze on the spot, his eyes wide. He tried to say something, but no sound came out. His arrogance and dignity were shattered into pieces in front of his family and neighbors. The decision was made. Richard was held legally accountable and was permanently separated from the family for our safety. The moment I heard it, I wept openly. They were tears of pain, but also tears of liberation. Emma leaned on my shoulder and sobbed, releasing everything she had suppressed for months. Michael closed his eyes, shed a tear, then gripped my hand tight and whispered, "Sarah, we finally did it." After that day, Richard was no longer a threat to us. The grand, imposing estate felt empty. Instead of shouting and malicious glares, a strange, unfamiliar peace settled in. Eleanor stayed in the house alone. When I visited her, she held my hand, tears welling in her eyes, and said, "Sarah, I'm sorry. I made things so hard for you. I doubted you and blamed you. But I understand now. If you hadn't stayed strong, our family would have lived in darkness forever. E hugged her and cried with her. Eleanor, I never once blamed you. Please, just live in peace now. Her tears were late, but they were enough to wash away the dark times. Emma also slowly regained her stability. The nightmares still lingered, but she smiled more often while looking at her baby. One afternoon, she held my hand and whispered, Sarah, I thought my life was over. But thanks to you and Michael, I found hope again. I'm going to raise my baby well, and I will never bow down to the darkness again. I was so proud of her. Michael had changed, too. He was no longer the son caught in the middle. He became a solid pillar for me, Emma, and his mother. One evening, he looked at me and said, I used to be helpless and weak, but you gave me the courage to fight back. I promise you, from now on, I'll stake everything I have to protect our family. I smiled through my tears. Finally, at the end of all the suffering, I saw the light of faith and love. The scars in our hearts remained, but I believe that with time, they will heal. The truth was revealed, and the darkness cleared. And those of us left behind will learn how to live even stronger. The greatest lesson I learned is that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing only allows evil to grow. No matter how painful it is, or how much you stand to lose, you must fight back bravely, because only the truth can pull you out of hell. And on that journey, love and solidarity for one another are the only flames that keep us from falling. One clear morning, I looked up at the sky. The dazzling sunlight pouring through the clouds seemed to signal a new beginning. I whispered softly, as if sending a message to myself, to Emma, and to Eleanor. Everything is going to be okay now. We've made it through the storm, and now it's time to learn how to heal. That brings us to the end of today's story. If Sarah's journey resonated with you, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.